Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to a conversation about the Ontario Line project with a focus tonight on the East segment. My name is Joseph Thornley and I'm the CEO of 76 Engage, Metrolinx's public engagement partner for virtual consultation. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for this evening's event, and as such, I'll aim to keep the event on time, ensure your questions are answered as clearly and completely as possible, and make sure as many questions are answered as possible. One important note: if you require closed captioning, you can turn on closed captioning by clicking on the CC icon that's at the very bottom of your video screen, and that will give you closed captioning for tonight's meeting. Tonight's event is part of a series of virtual events we're holding this month for all the Ontario Line station areas. And in fact, tonight is event number 8, and it's the second for the East segment. We'll be focusing on the Ontario Line stations tonight at East Harbour, Riverside, Leslieville, and Gerrard-Carlaw. The second half of the presentation at the beginning will focus on the Building Transit Faster Act and the newly designated transit corridor lands along the Ontario Line. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. If you have questions about other parts of the Ontario Line, you can register for other events or see past events that have already occurred by clicking on the live event registration button at the top of the screen, and that'll take you to where the other live events are. So tonight we'd like to focus on the East segment. Before we begin, I'd like to say that Metrolinx wishes to recognize that it operates on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. In particular, we acknowledge that the Ontario Line project takes place on Treaty 13 territory with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on these lands and has a responsibility to work with the original keepers of this territory and the many diverse Indigenous peoples living here today. Metrolinx remains committed to engaging with Indigenous peoples and nations on the Ontario Line project. Also, I'd just like to take a second in a Metrolinx tradition. Metrolinx is very concerned about safety. Public safety, safety of everyone. It's fundamental to everything that Metrolinx does. And with warmer weather and more people out enjoying the sunshine, it's important that we all remain safe and vigilant when walking near rail tracks, bridges, or crossings. If you see someone dangerously close to a rail line, please call 911 or Transit Safety 24 hours a day at 1-877-297-0642. That's 1-877-297-0642. So let's talk about this evening. We have about an hour and a half in total with an 8 p.m. end. As I said, there'll be a brief presentation, and then we'll move on to take questions. And by the way, the presentation can be found on your screen immediately below the video window. You'll see that it says presentation materials there, and you can download a PDF of the presentation if you'd like. We hope to have an hour in total for the questions after the presentation. And if you go right down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see that many people have already submitted written questions. Now, we'll make an effort to answer the questions in the order in which they are voted for, the most voted for questions, with a mixture of other topics to make sure that we don't just cover one topic and all. Tonight, we have a call-in option for people who want to ask your question verbally. So right under the video, you'll see a block that says call in with your question and join Zoom. We have a Zoom room where you'll be able to have your microphone turned on and you'll be able to ask the panel a question and they will hear your voice. Jackie Chaika is over there, and she'll be moderating that, which will come up in the last half hour of tonight's session. So if you'd like to ask your question verbally, join the Zoom room. On the other hand, if you'd just like to ask your question, but you'd like to keep on watching the presentation here, you can go down to the bottom of the page and you can add a written question at any time during the meeting. If you really want to be sure that your interest is answered live, vote it up, and it may well come during the live part of the question and answer. But regardless, don't worry. Even if you do submit a question tonight and we don't get to it, Metrolinx will make an effort to answer as many questions as possible online afterwards. So you'll always be able to come back to this page. You'll be able to see tonight's presentation. You'll be able to see the questions. You'll be able to see the video. Okay, we have a panel tonight who have been here doing this and are committed to providing information and listening to you. And so for those of you who've been here before, you'll recognize our panel. Richard Tucker is the Ontario Line Project Director. Malcolm Mackay is a sponsor for the Ontario Line Project. Ranjit Multani is a manager on Metrolinx's property team. Carrie Schaefer is a senior manager on the environmental programs and assessment team. And also with us tonight, Carolyn Tunks is a senior manager on the third-party adjacent works team. Welcome, Richard, Malcolm, Ranjit, Carrie, and Carolyn. Over to you, Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and welcome to everybody who's watching us tonight. And thank you for your time to be able to share this information. We have a lot of information to share tonight. We're going to be going through the slides at pace in order to make sure that we get lots of time for questions. We can always go back to the slides if the questions require us to do that. Tonight's agenda, we're going to be talking about the environmental assessment update. We're going to be talking about your neighborhood parks. So we've got some great news there. We're going to talk about the early works in the Lakeshore Corridor, the joint corridor. And then we're going to give a segment update of the east area where we have East Harbor, the station at Riverside, Leslieville, Girard. And then we're going to highlight the upcoming continued engagement. We're also going to be presenting the Building Transit Faster Act and update on that. And then we'll go into the Q&As. So now I'd like to pass it over to Carrie.
Great, thanks very much, Malcolm, and good evening, everyone. So before we jump into some of the more detailed discussion about project specifics, I wanted to take a moment to review our EA process and provide some clarification for the Ontario line. So as you might recall, our environmental assessment is following the Ontario Regulation 341/20, and this is a new regulation specifically for the Ontario line that came into effect last summer. But it very much resembles the transit project assessment process, which is the transit EA process that you might be more familiar with. The main difference here is that the TPAP versus the Ontario line regulation is that the Ontario line regulation actually, there are requirements for additional reporting and more points of contact and engagement with communities and interested parties. So as you can see from the slide in front of you, the first report completed under the EA process was the environmental conditions report. And this report really forms sort of the baseline in terms of background conditions. And this is the information we use and pull forward as we move into assessing our project impact. Now this report was completed back in 2020, and it's still available on our website for you to check out. The next important piece of EA work that we want to talk about tonight are the early works reports, because that's really the EA report that this area covers. The early works reports are standalone EA reports that focus solely on the early works portions of the Ontario line. And these are really fulsome reports that study the potential impacts of the proposed construction work and put forward mitigation in order to minimize these impacts to the greatest extent possible. So the Lower Don Bridge and some of the work at the Don Yard, as well as the Lakeshore East work that we're talking about tonight, these all fall under the category of early works, and they have specific EA reports that are dedicated to these elements of the Ontario line. And I just want to clarify that, no construction will move forward until these EA reports are completed. Now, the last piece of the requirements under our EA regulation is the Environmental Impact Assessment Report. And this report will study the remainder of the Ontario Line project and will very much resemble a typical EA report that you're used to seeing, so assessing proposed project and putting forward commitments to mitigation and future work. So if we flip ahead to the next slide, please. Having this many reports allows us to engage and connect with your communities more often. So under our regulation, there is actually requirements that we're providing all of our reports in draft form for public review and comment. So what that means is all of your comments are taken back and considered and incorporated as we update and finalize our EA reports. So really lots of opportunities for community and interested parties to provide feedback. And if we take a closer look at this slide here, you can see actually where we are with our reporting and our ongoing public engagement. So we've actually just hot off the press released our draft early works report for the Lower Don Bridge and Don Yard. And we will also be releasing a draft Lakeshore East Joint Corridor Early Works EA report early this fall for review and comment. And then, of course, finally, we're looking to early 2022 for the Environmental Impact Assessment report. Again, noting on this slide that construction commencement is to occur well after these EA reports are completed. So now, if we flip ahead one slide, wanted to take a moment to talk about the early works for the Lower Don Bridge and the Don Yard, and I'm going to flip it over to Richard now to give you some details here.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks very much, and good evening, everybody. The image here is the Lower Don Bridge, which spans, clear spans actually quite interestingly from the East Harbor, which you see on the left-hand side of the image. We're looking south along the Don Valley and the Don River here. And on the right-hand side, there's the Don Yard, which you're familiar with. This is a tide arch bridge is what's being proposed. It's a 108-meter clear span. And the work that's supposed to start in or sort of mid-2022, kind of April-May time period is currently what's scheduled, is the bridge abutments to support this bridge. And we'll start on the east side first and then move to the west side. And there's, in concert with that, there's some modifications to the tracks and signaling system within the Don Yard itself to accommodate the Ontario Line tracks as they come in, and the portal that goes underground at that point, and also modifications to Lakeshore East of the bridge location to allow the tracks and the construction of East Harbor Station to commence. So next slide, over to you, Carrie.
Thanks very much, Richard. So as I mentioned, the draft Lower Don Bridge and Early Works EA report was just released this week for public review and comment. And so similar to any EA report that you might be used to seeing, it provides that overview of the proposed work. It assesses the project and all of the environmental disciplines you see here. And it outlines our commitments to mitigation and minimizing any potential adverse impacts. So we will be taking comments and feedback on the report for 30 days. So really encouraging everybody to check this out and provide us with your thoughts and comments. Thanks very much. Malcolm, back to you.
Thank you very much, Carrie and Richard. So tonight we're talking about the east segment. It comes out of the ground in the Don Yard and goes across the new bridge at the Don River and goes into a new elevated station at East Harbor, then starts to turn north and goes towards the Riverside Leslieville Station and continues in the joint corridor to Girard Station, where it dips and goes underground, continuing up north to Pape Avenue. On the next slide, we've got some news about the parks. Our construction team has done an incredible amount of work rephasing and restaging the work that's going to be conducted in the corridor to be able to construct most of it from inside the property lines that we have. Each individual park has a net new increase in space. And the total net increase in space is almost 2,600 square meters, which is the equivalent of 2 Olympic-sized pools. On the next slide, we have Bruce Mackey and Jimmy Simpson Park. In Bruce Mackey Park, we'll be increasing about 1,100 square meters of new green space. And that's equivalent to almost a Olympic-sized pool. In Bruce Mackey Park, the additional space varies, but it's up to 7 meters wide, widening of the park. In Jimmy Simpson Park, we have approximately 700 meters of new park space, and that is about 3 meters wider generally down the length of the park. We've also installed some survey markers inside our fence to show where the new retaining wall is going to go. You can visit this. They're currently only on the Bruce Mackey side of the alignment, but we'll be soon adding them to the Jimmy Simpson side of the alignment too, as well as at the McCleary Playground. On the next slide, we have the McCleary Playground. Here we're going to be adding 3 meters of new green space to the park, which is about 5 meters down the entire length of the park. That's new park space. And that's approximately equal to a tennis court and a half being added to that park. Next slide. Up at Gerard Carlaw Parkette, this is where a station is. And at this station, we're going to be needing a large part of the dog park during construction. But at the end of the day, when we hand everything back, that park is actually going to be increased by 500 meters, which will create new spaces for programming. In response to this, we're working quite closely with city parks and forestry to try and identify other adjacent parks where we can move some of the programming that was in the Gerard Carlaw Parkette temporarily to the new adjacent park to make sure that the programming spaces are still available to the community. On the next slide, I'll pass this to Richard.
Hi, Malcolm. Thanks very much. So we're really excited about this particular development. As you know, there was a lot of questions about how we were going to be able to build from inside our corridor, and the very exciting part of this development is that we won't be impacting the park spaces at all. We are actually building entirely from within the corridor, and I'll go on to share with you exactly how we plan to access the corridor without impacting the park spaces. In this particular picture, you can see what we call precast T-walls. And this is, if you imagine you were standing in the middle of the railway corridor, obviously with your safety gear on, that you'd be looking at the construction going on, and you can see these precast T's their T is lying down on its side. And basically, we put the aggregate around them, and they're self-supporting in this formation, and work for the railway, supporting the railway loads that will be incurred. And we can put noise walls on top of these. And essentially, all the work, as you can see, is being done entirely from within the railway corridor, as per this example. Next slide, please. So obviously, to do the work from inside the railway corridor, we have to access the railway corridor. So as you can see on here, we've marked 8 locations where we'll be needing to access the railway corridor. So if we start from Eastern Avenue, which is at the far left-hand side of the image, bottom of the image, you'll see items 1 and 2, which are basically the 356 Eastern Avenue, which is a storage warehouse there now currently, and some access that goes up onto the railway corridor just behind the Salter Street Parkette using the existing part of the existing lane that's there. But again, the access, I should emphasize, that all the access is from main streets. We are not accessing any of the construction works from local residential streets. So in this case, we're coming off Eastern Avenue, as you can see on the west side, which is on the above the corridor in this picture. We'll be coming off Eastern Avenue, and then there's a similar access on the other side of Eastern Avenue by Dibble Street. If we go to number 3, that's at Queen Street, you can see the access at coming off of Queen Street. And again, not touching the McCleary Playground, but just using in that location, just an area for the expansion of the Queen Street Bridge. We're rebuilding the Queen Street Bridge. Up at Dundas, again, you see 4 and 5, which are access points there. Number 6 is access from Logan. And number 7 is the Gerard Street Parkette that we talked about. Number 8 is the laydown area for this construction, and that's an existing parking lot on Dickens Avenue. So we can dive into these in a little more detail. I think there's slides for each of them. So we go to the next slide. Here's that access off Eastern Avenue, and you can see the detail there with the red circle. On either side of the railway corridor, there'll be ramps that basically build up, and the trucks would access onto the railway corridor at each of those points. Again, from Eastern Avenue, Main Street only. Next slide. This is a quick example of what you would possibly see, and it's hard to see because it's basically that thin white line that crosses the image from left to right. And it's basically coming, the trucks would be coming from the right-hand side of the image and climbing up under the railway quarter behind the Salter Street parkette. I do have to mention in this image, I noticed an error that there's a white shading in the lower left-hand corner of this image, and that's incorrect. So that that area by the woman walking her dog and by that signage there is not required for construction. And this was a slide obviously taken from an earlier version before we managed to figure out exactly how to get onto the corridor without affecting any local infrastructure. Next slide, please. So if we go up here, this is a small city-owned plaza just to the north of the McCleary Playground. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the area that we're intending to use there. This is not primarily for access. This is really for the reconstruction of the Queen Street Bridge at this location. In the upper left-hand side of each of these slides, you can see the timing of the access requirements, the approximate duration, and you can see works in these areas are both at Eastern and in this area scheduled to start in the summer of next year, about a year from now, and go through the fall of 2023. Next slide, please. So here we are up at Dundas, and this is access onto the east side of the corridor, so we do not impact Booth Avenue or Paisley Avenue or Jimmy Simpson Park or the Rec Center. None of those facilities will be impacted by this construction, and the Ball Diamond and all the other facilities in the park will remain open at all times. The access here again is from Dundas Street, and the one that is red circle is a ramp onto the corridor, and the one on the north side or the upper side of the corridor is basically for the Dundas Street Bridge. Next slide. And you can see the image of the approximate location of the access up onto the corridor at this point coming off of Dundas. Again, you can see the work here is scheduled from the summer of 22 to the fall of 23. Next slide, please. This is the area for the construction of the bridge that's on the other side of the corridor. So on the west side of Dundas, west side of the corridor and the south side of Dundas. If we go to the next slide, you can see the area that we're talking about there, which is just right on the edge of Bruce Mackey Park. Again, we're looking at summer of 23 through the fall of 24 in this area. Next slide, please. This is a Logan Avenue access. We'd be heading up from the Logan Avenue onto the corridor at this point. Next slide, please. And you can see the proposed access there in the shaded white rectangle. Access requirements here are from the summer of 23 through the fall of 24. Next slide, please. And then we come to the Gerard Carlaw Parkette. We're talking about access here from fall of 23 through the winter of 29, and that's really for the construction of the station at this location. So if you move on to the next slide, please. You can see that what we're talking about here is acquiring this property. I believe this is on First Avenue and it's shaded red in this particular case. And so we have two sets of works here, the early works, which is the regrading and of the corridor and the preparation for the 6-track configuration goes from the fall of 23 through the fall of 24, followed by construction of the Gerard station from fall of 24 through the fall-winter of 29. Again, you can see the white shaded area here, which is the Gerard Carlaw Dog Parkette. And you can see the periods we've been talking about there. The intention is that this land, the parkette, together with the other land from First Avenue, will be put together in a brand new park that will increase the size of this area. So next slide, please. So this is East Harbor, and I think this is back to Malcolm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was a very comprehensive outline of the construction access. Thank you. So this slide is speaking to East Harbor. It's a vital city building station for us. There's going to be more than 50,000 new jobs stationed here. More than 5,800 residents will be living within a comfortable 10-minute walk of this. And Infrastructure Ontario and the Ministry of Transportation are working together to develop this East Harbor site and station into a major station where GO Transit will be stopping. All of the 4 lines will have the capability to stop here. And we're expecting a great deal of transfer here, up to 5,600 or 8,600 transfers during the peak hour and 14,900 people to use this station during the peak hour. This is actually our busiest station, our second busiest station in the alignment. On the next slide, we go to Leslieville Riverside Station. Here we have an elevated station that's going across Queen Street. We're expecting 4,000 people during the busiest hour to be using this, as well as 2,800 people transferring from the streetcar during its busiest hour. It's important that we have this station here because the interconnectivity of the surface transit network is vital to good network transit operations. On the next slide, we have the cross section of the alignment through Jimmy Simpson Park. And this shows the track spacings, and then ghosted into this is also the existing GO trains and where they are situated in the corridor. So, take some time when you're going through these slides at home and take a look at this. And if you have any questions, make sure you get back to us. On the next slide, we go up to Gerrard Station. Gerrard is also an important station from the point of view of ridership. We have 3,300 people expecting to use this station during its busiest time, with over 2,000 transfers from the surface network and streetcar network up at this station. And as Richard said, this is a station that's being built adjacent to the existing park, which at the end of the day, we will be making larger. And as I said earlier in the presentation, we're working quite closely with Toronto Parks and Forestry to identify other local parks where we can move the programming of this space during construction to be able to make sure that all the constituents and people in this area have the same service. On the next slide is our next community engagement activities. We have, through August and July, we have upcoming consultation with the community on the options for noise retaining walls. And we're going to continue this regular update. And we're actually very excited that we're expecting soon to be out of this COVID environment and be able to meet in person. In September, we're expecting the draft early works report to be issued. And then in early 2022, the environmental impact assessment report and construction to start in mid-2022. On the next slide, we're going to start talking about the Building Transit Faster Act, and I'm going to pass that over to Carolyn. Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Malcolm. Good evening. So we're going to switch gears here, and I'm going to share some information and hopefully provide some clarity on the Building Transit Faster Act, the transit corridor lands, and what both of these items mean to property owners. Before I get started, though, I do just want to take a minute. I know Malcolm mentioned it. If there is something that we missed through the slides or through the Q&A, and there's still some uncertainty, we really encourage you to reach out to us. And give us a call and let us work with you to address any concerns that you still might have. So for those of you who don't know what the Building Transit Faster Act is, it's essentially a toolkit that provides Metrolinx with measures to expedite the delivery of transit planning and construction by way of legislation. So it came into force last year, and currently we have, and it applies to the 4 priority subway projects right now. And currently we have 3 of those 4 projects fully in effect, with Ontario Line being one of the 3. And it really is intended to streamline processes, remove barriers that could impact our timely completion of transit projects. But it's also intended to enhance our coordination and our partnerships with public and private stakeholders. So on the next slide. So the transit corridor lands really is the crux and the focus of the Act. And under the Act, we are required to designate this area, what we would call the transit corridor lands. And this is the area where the provisions and the permitting of the Act apply to. So a common question that we've heard is, well, how did you determine what the transit corridor lands are? So Metrolinx undertook a technical exercise where we identified the spatial requirements for what the transit corridor lands would look like. And this was done in a very sequenced approach. And it is here on the slide. So we can just go through it a little bit quickly. So the first thing we did is we identified the land needed for the tunnel and the accurate alignment and the station infrastructure. Then we applied a 30-meter safeguard around that space. Then after that, we went back and we made more manual refinements to really specifically look at what the project needs would be. And so this looked at more of construction means and methods. So some examples would be area needed for access points or laydown or staging. We also considered projects that could potentially overlap with this area, or maybe space that we need to get onto to do more studies. And then after that, and a lot of you've noticed, pointed out too, that there's even some areas that are even wider. And so these areas where we've expanded it even further, we call these bump outs. And so what's happening at a bump out is the alignment is intersecting with a road intersection. And we're trying to accommodate for the ripple effect of utility work, utility relocations, or potentially traffic impacts. So we've expanded out to include the entire road intersection in those spots up into the adjacent intersections. So all of this different rationale points is really what makes up the core project needs, and that's what we've called the transit corridor lands. And then from the edge of that, we've added a 10-meter buffer to account for utility permitting. And from the edge of that, we've added another 20-meter buffer to account for permitting for building and structures. So in total, the transit corridor lands plus the 30-meter buffer is the area that's designated under the Act. On the next slide, please. So what does this mean for your property? So we really do anticipate that there will be little to no impact for most property owners and little disturbance to their everyday life. There are 3 implications, though, that we've noted here on the screen in bold. The first one is the main implication, and then the latter 2 are just potential implications. And I'm going to go through them in more detail for each bullet. They're each on a slide. So on the next slide. Okay, so for the first one, the temporary notice on title. So the designation notice will be registered on title and can be you can view it through a title search in the land registry office. But we do want to reiterate that we think that the notice is just for awareness or informational. So it's to notify potential future buyers that this property is in close proximity to a transit project. The notice itself does not restrict or prevent anyone from renting, leasing, or selling their property, and we really anticipate it to have little impact, no impact on property value. So the other thing about the notice is that currently the Act applies to planning and construction. So once those phases are complete, the notice will be removed. So next slide. So the second implication is that Metrolinx may need to access property for a specified purpose. So we've identified 2 main circumstances that this could apply to. So the first would be what we would call a preview inspection. And this is where Metrolinx may need to enter property to do something like a visual assessment or a site survey, might need to support some environmental due diligence. So this could include collecting a water or a soil sample. And then the second situation or circumstance we've identified for this could be where we've identified a known obstruction that we know will pose as an interference to the transit project. So for both of these situations, the process that we would first or primarily try to use would be our default practice of working amicably with the property owner. So we would try to secure permission to enter first, and it's only should we not achieve that, then we return to the processes of Building Transit Faster Act. So should we use either of the processes for either of these circumstances, we would issue a notice to the property owner, which triggers a 30-day window. And then after the 30-day window, Metrolinx would have the ability to enter the property. Next slide. So the third major implication is the permitting requirement, which I think most people have heard about. So if a property owner does intend to build or change a building or structure on their property, we are requesting that they come to us and work with us and reach out. There is the email address on the screen. Some examples of projects that could include where a property owner might need to obtain a permit from Metrolinx could be a home, deck, pool, or shed, We really think it would be these large exterior home rental projects. Interior renos do not need to come to us for a permit. It also, I think, is important to note that Metrolinx has always been an external commenting agency for these types of permits, but we've always worked with the municipality as our main conduit. So now we're just asking that property owners come work with us more directly. So if you think that maybe your project falls in one of these categories, please reach out, just have a conversation with us, and we can initiate a review with you. Next slide. So how will I know if my property has been affected? So it is a requirement of the Act for property owners to be notified once the project is in effect. So Ontario Line did become in effect in early June. So we released notices shortly after. So most residents should have received their notice by now in the mail. You can also double check if there's any uncertainty. If you're not sure if you got your notice, you can either reach out to us or you can check our website. We have a pretty user-friendly application where you can search for your address. There is a couple caveats where if you live in a condo building or an apartment, you wouldn't have received a notice. We just targeted condo management boards and apartment owners solely and asked that they work with their normal communication channels to let tenants know. And then I know I've already mentioned it, but we just want to reiterate that just because you received a notice, it doesn't necessarily mean in any sort of way that any of the types of things I've mentioned before will apply to your property. So if there is a situation where we do need to access or use your property in any way, that will all be handled through a separate notice on a case-by-case basis. And I think this segues nicely into some more property sort of implications. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Ranjit.
Thank you. So one of the questions that we always get is what happens when my property is required. First thing I want to highlight is I know the project team does a lot of work to try to minimize the footprint, but in the event your property is absolutely necessary, we will reach out to you with a separate written notification. And once that process has started, it will open up lines of communication where we will work with you one-on-one to try to negotiate an amicable deal for whether your property is required, part of your property is required, or there's a full taking that's required. In some circumstances, we may leverage the expropriation process, but that is done as an absolutely last resort. So regardless of the approach that's taken, whether it's expropriation or whether it's an amicable deal, the owners or tenants are compensated based on a fair market value. And the intent of that is really to make sure that owners or tenants are not at a financial loss. Next slide. I think that's back to you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Ranjit. We're very thankful for your time so far. We really would like to have your input. Your feedback is vital to help us make the Ontario Line move forward in a way that improves the community. There's a number of ways for you to do that. You can send us an email at ontarioline@metrolinx.com. You can call us to our active telephone number, 416-202-5100. And you can also sign up for the latest newsletters and keep abreast with our postings. And that's at metrolinx.com/Ontario Line. I'd like to enter the Q&A and pass it back to Joseph.
Okay, thank you, Metrolinx team. Thank you, Richard, Malcolm, Ranjit, Carrie, and Carolyn. I know that you're all going to be answering questions. So let's just take a look at the questions. Now, they've been moving around quite a bit, and a couple have risen in the order, but the first three are still the same. So I'm just going to ask them not quite in the order that they're there on the page right now, but it just seems to me the order in which we can go from the general down to the more specific. So the first question that I want to ask is the question that is about the difference between above or below ground grade construction. And it is a question about both cost and time. I think, Malcolm, you'd probably be the right person to handle this. And the question is, estimated plus or minus millions, What is the cost difference between an above ground Ontario line versus a buried option? And what is the estimated difference in time to complete either option, which now, says the questioner, includes raising, regrading the entire corridor and bridges? So the difference, cost and time. Malcolm, can you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely, Joseph. Thank you. So we've had this question often, and we actually have a very active work program right now. We're looking at 5 different underground type options, and they all came from the community, and they're all slightly different. And but they all are trying to achieve the same thing, which is maintaining the above ground alignment at East Harbor Station, and getting underground as soon as possible after that. There is one version that is the complete undergrounding of the entire alignment. So we've got an engineering group looking at this. We have done some initial early work, and the signs that we're seeing is that undergrounding in various formats could be anywhere from 800 million to over $1 billion to underground, and it could affect the schedule by anywhere from 15 to 24 months for the various types. So we'll be sharing that very shortly. We know we've been asked about alignments that go east along Eastern and up to a Carlock Queen Station and then continue up to Gerrard. We're looking at that, and we will be coming out with that in very short order, I'm hoping, before our next meeting. Back to you, Joseph.
Okay, thank you for that, Malcolm. I know that those are questions that come up at each meeting, and obviously of ongoing concern to the community, and it's good to hear the information. So talking about costs, this is a question that during the course of the meeting came right up to the top of the list. And I think, Carolyn, this may well be for you, and it is about the value of our homes. And in general, what does being within the 30-meter corridor do to the value of our homes? Is it possible to have a real estate agent available during question and answer? If not tonight, obviously, maybe at a future event.
Thanks, Joseph. So yeah, I can certainly take a stab at this question. So it's pretty difficult to comment on this one because there's so many factors that influence property value. But we do, and I think this is in reference to the notice being on title, but we really do anticipate the notice itself won't have a negative impact on property value. But there's people value so many different things, and somebody might value being close to transit, which could also be a good thing. So I think it's a difficult question to ask, to land on an absolute yes or no, but we do not foresee for the notice itself being there. It is just an awareness piece. So we don't suspect that to influence in a negative way the value. In terms of the real estate lawyer comment, we did work closely with the real estate legal team to support the provisions of the Act and a lot of the processes that back those up. We've also notified, when Ontario Line came into effect, we notified the Toronto Region Real Estate Board. We also notified the Ontario Real Estate Association. And so I think that there's an opportunity in the future to work closely with those 2 organizations to make sure, because those will be the individuals that will be advising our public stakeholders. So I think that we're going to be looking into an opportunity in the future to have some more engagement with them and make sure that they're well informed of what this all means for them as well.
Okay, thank you. Let's come over, and Carrie, I think based on what you presented, this one may well be for you. And again, this one I think probably relates to the questions already asked, previously asked, and it's about vibration and potential damage to existing building foundations. And the questioner asks, vibration and potential damage with an aging infrastructure and existing housing structures that were built over 100 years ago. How is Metrolinx planning to address concerns around potential damage to residential and commercial building foundations due to the vibration caused either during construction or when the transit is fully operational? Would you be able to take a stab at that, please, Carrie?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks very much for the question. I think it's a good one. And I'm hearing concerns around construction and operation. So perhaps I'll start with construction. Um, and as you'll recall from the presentation, the environmental conditions report that was put out about a year back also included a cultural heritage report, which actually evaluated and identified all the heritage homes in and around the Ontario Line study area. So we are very aware of those very sensitive homes, and the age of those homes, and all the sensitivities that surround that. And what I can tell you is that in our EA reports, as well as in our contracts, we specify specific criteria in terms of vibration limits for all foundations and all homes, but we actually have a more stringent criteria for heritage homes. There is a bylaw with the city, and our criteria is actually more stringent than that. So we are very, very careful and mindful of the age of the homes and the sensitivity of the homes. Now, and I know Richard will emphasize this as well, but before we carry out any construction activity, we do what's called a pre-construction survey to assess the conditions of the foundations and of the home. So if there's any concerns later on, we can come back and check on that. I will also say that before our constructors can start any work in the area, they're required, as per our contracts, to submit a noise and vibration management plan. And that really spells out exactly how they're going to meet the specific stringent criteria for noise and vibration throughout the duration of the construction project. So before any construction can proceed, Metrolinx will need to review this and confirm that it's appropriate. And then throughout the whole duration of the construction, we'll be doing real-time noise and vibration monitoring to ensure that the levels are within the acceptable limits. And we do this in real time, and we set all sorts of alerts. So if vibration levels do start creeping up in the unlikely event, we can be proactive about it, and we can catch that before there's any issue. So we have a lot of protection built into our contracts to ensure that these very sensitive, important homes and foundations are kept safe throughout construction. And then if we flip over to operations, we're doing, as a part of our early works report, which will be released shortly, we are carrying out very thorough, very rigorous noise and vibration operational assessments to determine exactly where any mitigation would need to go to ensure that there are no significant increases in vibration due to the Ontario Line or due to the GO expansion as well, because we are assessing those things in conjunction with each other. So some of the mitigation measures that we are looking at that we are tried, tested, and true, we know that they are effective, would be ballast mats, which are basically like big rubber mats that go under the ballast of the tracks and absorb some of the vibration and prevent it from propagating to those sensitive homes. So those are things that we're exploring now, as well as things like resilient fasteners that have the same effect. So we've taken a very close look at this. We recognize how important these sensitive homes are in your area, and we're doing everything we can to protect those. So thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So I think this is probably coming back to either Malcolm, either you or Richard, and it concerns the Pape and Girard Tunnel. This is one that a lot of people have voted up during this presentation. And the question is, where will the tunnel start between Pape stations and Girard stations, and will homes be impacted?
Do you want to take that one on, Malcolm?
I'll start it, Richard. So we're intending to launch tunnel boring machines from a property on the north side of Girard, and we will be tunneling from that point forward. We'll also be building in that property a portal to go from above ground to underground. So the full assessment of properties in that area is underway right now. We're expecting, if there are any properties to be impacted, that they will be minimal, but we will be going down the road underground through that area up towards Pape Station. And we will have an update of Pape Station at our next public open house. Richard, would you like to talk about the tunnel boring and the materials that we're in?
Yeah, so at that location, which is just at Gerard, just on the north side of the railway corridor, we'll be putting a shaft down that allows the tunnel boring machines to start and immediately start working to the north. In this area, we're actually working in what's called glacial till, which is, as most of you know, if you've tried to put a bush or something in their backyard, is essentially a mixture of sand and some boulders and some clay, material that's fairly common in this area and it was left behind when the glaciers retreated many thousands of years ago. The characteristic of the soil is that it works well for tunnel boring machines. There is some water in here that will be addressed by we have a waterproof liner that goes around the tunnel as it moves forward and as these segments are produced. And basically the site is serviced from Gerard and avenues, and so we're staying away from any impact on the local streets. We expect to mainly run up the right of way on Pape Avenue. We may be under some homes at certain points, but as Malcolm said, we're in the process of assessing that. I would say that this part of the line is part of what we call the North Civil segment, and that part has not yet gone into the market for construction right at the moment. We have the reason we're looking at the joint corridor is it's part of our early works program, as well as South Civils, which is in the downtown, and the RSSOM, which is the rolling stock and the operations and maintenance. The North Civils will be coming out starting the process later this year, and that's why it's the definition in this area is a little bit behind the other ones because they had the first priority.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you very much for that answer. And I just want to remind people, if you have come onto this meeting late, right now we're taking the written questions that were submitted prior to the meeting. There is an opportunity, if you want to raise your voice and have your voice heard, that you can join a Zoom room. And right below the video that you're watching, you'll see a heading that says call in with your question and a yellow button that says join Zoom. We'll be going to the Zoom room in a few minutes, and Jackie Chaika will be there to take your moderate your questions there. So go over there if you want to, if you want to actually raise your voice. The Zoom room will be taking questions on a first come, first served basis. Let's take a few more written questions, however, and here's one that I've been watching edge up in votes during the meeting. And I think, Malcolm, this is probably one that would go over to you, and it concerns pedestrian cycling link across the Lower Don Bridge. And our questioner asks, where have the pedestrian cycling references gone for the new Lower Don Bridge? It's been promised for years to be part of any new track build for accessing East Harbor, was referenced by Metrolinx in the Lower Don Bridge slide in the April open house meetings, yet now is conspicuously missing from the description of what will be built in the early works report and the press release and info page about the bridge. Can you please explain how and what the pedestrian cycling access across the river will look like? Malcolm, are you able to tackle that one?
Certainly, Joseph. Yeah, so when we went with the what we call the North Alignment, which was shifting both of the Ontario line tracks to the north side of the corridor, at that point in time, our bridge width became such that adding the multi-purpose bike path to it became prohibitive. So we are looking at building a multi-purpose bike path and pedestrian over the Don River on the north side of our bridge. We're working together with the East Harbor team to be able to deliver that. So we understand the importance of that multi-link, multi-purpose trail. And we're looking forward to delivering it as part of the Lower Don pieces of work that are happening as part of the Ontario line and the East Harbor build-out.
Yeah, and and I'd just like to add to Malcolm's answer that that in delinking from the railway bridge to a separate pedestrian multi-use trail bridge, we have opened up a lot more options. Obviously, when you have a railway bridge, it's very much dictated by the alignment of the tracks and the profile of the tracks. Whereas when you have an independent bridge that's specifically designed for pedestrians and bicycles, you have a lot more design options that you can go with, and you can have a lot more creativity in the terms of the creation of that bridge. So I think overall it's actually a positive development, and you won't be cycling next door to a train immediately beside you. So I think there's a lot of good upside to the delinking disaggregation of the two bridges.
Okay, thank you. So impact on people, environment and human health measures. I'm wondering, Carrie, whether this might be something for you. The question is, our neighbors are really concerned about noise and vibration from the increased number of trains. Currently, there are very few trains each day, about 150. Can you please confirm the numbers? And by 2030, that will increase to 1,500. So from 150 to 1,500, including both diesel and electric. Again, they're asking for a confirmation. You may not be able to do that right now. Which noise and vibration measures will be mandated to address this dramatic increase in train traffic? So as the number of trains goes up, what are the measures that will the noise and vibration mitigation measures that will address that?
Yep, I can take that. Thanks very much. And so the questions around noise and vibration and the number of trains, and yes, that's about accurate. I think we have around 130 trains currently on the Lakeshore East Corridor, with some non-revenue trains as well in addition to that. And we'll be going up to around the level that you mentioned in the question. That is accurate. But we've committed to seamless noise walls up and down the entire joint corridor. And what that's going to do is actually reduce the noise from every train passed by, not just for future Ontario line trains, but also for current GO trains. As you're well aware, as the community living around the corridor, there currently isn't any mitigation built there at the moment. And so the trains that are passing by, there is no obstructions and there is no cutoff from the noise to your homes. As a part of the early works program, these noise walls will be built. So they will be in place and have the added benefit well before the Ontario line comes into place. So what that means is as GO train numbers continue to expand along the corridor, you'll have the added benefit of those noise walls there. We do expect, although there are increases in train traffic, we do expect with the reduction felt by the noise walls that we will on average be able to reduce noise all along the joint corridor in the majority of areas. So that is really good news. On the vibration side, as I mentioned, I think in the last question, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox that can effectively mitigate vibration. These have proven to be effective on many projects. Ballast mats are one thing that we'll be exploring for the GO expansion. So putting those rubber mats under the ballast as the tracks for the GO trains get moved. We'll also be looking at things like resilient fasteners for the Ontario line tracks, all to ensure that there are no significant increases in vibration. So recognizing that, yes, there will be increases in train traffic. There will be a mix while we are moving to electric trains. There will remain some diesel trains. This has all been accounted for in our assessment process. So we're looking at the ultimate a maximum case scenario of service on this corridor when we're conducting our assessment, and we'll be putting forward solutions that minimize the impacts there and actually provide some benefits to your community. So thanks very much for the question.
Okay. I'd like to just add to that. We're also bringing in brand new trains. They're fully automated trains. They're driverless. So that means that the chance of human error of braking hard is eliminated. The new technology is also quieter with respect to how they brake, with regenerative braking rather than brake pads. So there's a number of very good features that are coming into Toronto with the new, what is called Creative Automation 4 trains. that will in and of itself reduce the noise and vibration of the trains that we're bringing to the Ontario line. Back to you, Joseph.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's do one more question from the written questions, and then we will go over to Jackie Chaika in the Zoom room for verbal questions. So, and we can always come back here later. But the last, for this segment, the last question is about existing mature trees. Malcolm, I think that this is in down your line. Can you talk about the existing mature trees beside the tracks in Bruce Mackey and Jimmy Simpson parks or in the row? The illustrations from the last consultation, this questioner found them misleading. So can you talk more specifically about the mature trees and their treatment there?
Yeah, so with the work that we've just recently completed, finalizing where the retaining walls are going to go, we're now going to be moving into the next phase of the evaluation of the getting the arborists out there and looking at the trees. When we do this, we take an inventory of trees. We also note which ones are native species, which ones are invasive, which ones are in good health, which ones are in bad health. And we go through the entire alignment. We will very likely be coming out at our next session with yourselves with that tree inventory. And we'll be talking about how and what trees will be needed to be removed through the corridor. But without doubt, the number of trees is significantly reduced from what it might have been in the early stages of our design. And that's a very positive outcome. And the other thing is that when we do identify trees that are potentially going to be removed, we have a replacement ratio that has to be planted, and we'll work with the City of Toronto to locate locations where those trees can be planted. And so the earlier we plant the trees, the quicker they come to maturity. So that's part of the program that we would like to do right away is do our tree planting as early in the program as possible so that when we do open the line, the trees will be more mature and more robust and well situated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's open up the Zoom room for a second. Jackie Chaika, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Joseph.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody, to the Zoom room. We have a good amount of questions to go through tonight, so we'll launch right into it. With that, we have our first question coming from Alexander. Please go ahead, Alexander.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the presentation. I was just curious a bit about the area around the Dundas overpass. So there was said there was 2 access windows, one on the east, one on the west. Could you just clarify like what's the total duration is going to be and how the traffic is going to be handled there?
Sure, it's Richard here. Be happy to address that. So as we said, the access is off of Dundas Avenue, Dundas Street, and essentially, I'm just confirming the dates here. Basically, we're looking at the period on the west side of the corridor in fall of 23 to fall of 24. And then on the east side, we're looking at the summer of 22 through the fall of 23. So overall, we're looking between summer of 22 and the fall of 24 in that area. And again, all the streets would become, all the access would be off Dundas directly with a flagger, flagman, and appropriate safety precautions for pedestrians and cars and bicycles.
Great, thanks so much, Richard. All right, we're going to go to our next question coming from Jennifer from the Riverside VIA office. Jennifer, go ahead.
Oh, so my question was about the orange areas you had noted along the corridor and how they were areas that would be, I guess, expanded into for the project. I was also wondering about if you could tell us more about the properties further out that may be expropriated to just get a fuller picture of kind of how far out that will go?
Sure, I can. I'm not sure what you mean by further out. Is it further to the east or west? I'm not sure if that what you were looking for. The areas that we showed on the maps and showed in greater detail, there is some acquiring of property at on Eastern Avenue for access on the from Eastern Avenue onto the corridor on the west side. And we are acquiring that parking lot up on Dickens Street for laydown. And there's some other minor acquisitions that are required temporarily for those access requirements at Dundas and at on the south side of the corridor, also on Logan on the north side of the corridor. And then there's some property, permanent property take and temporary property take on the at the Gerrard Street Parquet and at First Avenue. And hopefully that answers the question.
And Jennifer, we have also been in contact with the property owners that you've seen tonight identified. So there is an engagement that's underway to with our real estate team and them to secure those properties. And you know, as always, we love hearing from the BIAs, and you know, if there's anything that we can do to help you, please. We're, as I said, we're a phone call away. Don't hesitate to knock on our door.
Great. Thanks so much, Malcolm. Thanks, Richard. We'll go to our next question coming from Mary Fragadakis. Please go ahead. Mary, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Oh, thanks so much, Jackie. Regarding the extra park space, I think people have commented in the chat, it's a bit of a headline. You're talking about the parks being a bit wider with a high retaining wall for the track bed, plus the high fencing for noise. So the good news is there's more green space. The bad news is it has a backdrop of concrete and fencing. So two questions really off of that are, how will you soften the appearance from the parks? And does this meet the public realm list of items that the province gave Davenport, which was, I believe, $70 million for public realm and new parks?
Hi, Mary. I can talk to that. So there's a number of good news stories here. One is we've developed a kit of parts for these retaining walls to be able to add some of the some foliage to them, to have growth on them. There's also an ability for us to do different styles of noise walls. Obviously, some of them being transparent will allow light to get through and essentially disappear. So there's a number of things that we can do where we've talked about in some of the spaces where the handback might occur. We could do some berming there to create some landscaping or streetscaping opportunities. The other thing that we're doing is in every one of these parks, we've started an outreach with Toronto Parks to do a park improvement program. We actually just met with them this week, and we started laying out what the program could look like, and seeking input from them, and then finding out from the community what the communities would like to see in their parks. So what we can do there is we can rejuvenate existing facilities, existing programming spaces, lighting, or we can add new features. We could add a climbing wall. We could add a splash pad. So there's a number of exciting opportunities. We're going to be investing in the community on all these parks. And I think it's going to be a very positive outcome for those park spaces. So we're excited to be working with Toronto Parks and eventually working with the community. The playground is a good example of a community space that was designed, developed by the community, implemented by the community, and that's the sort of strength that we want to draw upon when we start looking at what's available to these parks. So I hope that answers your question. Back to you, Jackie.
And if I could, Jackie, it's Richard here. I just add as well that the good news story that through the T-walls and other techniques, we've managed to work out a way where we're not impacting these parks during the construction period. So certainly the extra area for the parks is a great long-term story, and the short-term story is that these parks will remain in operation and with minimal impact to them during the construction phase.
Great. Thanks so much, Malcolm and Richard. All right, we're going to go to our next person. BJ, you're next. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you. My question is about the Pape South area. It wasn't specifically covered in your presentation. And specifically, I'm a property owner way down a side street in that area. And so I got one of the notices about you're in a transit corridor. I've been trying to find out how I am in a transit corridor since then and had exchanges with your office at Toronto East at Metrolinx.com and found an image on your website that indicated that there was a route going up Pape, but there was some kind of swing route that went all the way over to Jones and then cut diagonally across the neighborhood over to Pape. And all it was labeled was previously designed or something. I asked a question about that to the Metrolinx office, and they didn't reply. And today that map is off your website, but there's no explanation about things. So I'm here as a question just to say, since I can't seem to get an answer in the regular channels, is there only one route up Pape Avenue? Is that the basis for the transit corridor? Or is there some other little route that's planned that has this little sort of carry along, swing over up to Jones and then cut diagonally across over to the Pape station? Because it was on that map, now it's gone. I found no other reference, and yet I do have a property owner notification. And when I looked at the transit corridor map, which thank you, Peter Tavin's office finally sent me, I looked at my property and it said, oh yeah, you're right on top of a transit corridor. And the only way that is because somebody thinks that big swing route is still alive. Can any of you help me with this question? Don't all start at once.
Yeah, no, it takes us time to get off mute. BJ, so first off, we are designing right now the Pape station and the alignment both north and south of Pape station. We're working to finalize that. So I'm hoping that the transit corridor was based on maybe the earliest work. What I would welcome you to do is get in touch with either myself or anybody on this table, and we can certainly get you your answer and look at your property in particular. And I would encourage anyone who has this question to get in touch with us. We should be responsive to you, and we really want to make sure that with these letters that you understand why you're in there, and what the likelihood. Most cases, the likelihood of any impact whatsoever as a result of the BTFA letters is negligible. So please reach out to us. But we will be coming out with the alignment, the north alignment around Pape in short order. But in the immediate, to deal with your question about the BTFA, it's what I would suggest is that you call back into Jackie, and Jackie will give you our contact information so that we can get in touch with you and answer your question.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Jackie?
All right, we're going to go to our next question coming from Kelly. Kelly, go ahead.
Hi there. I have a bunch of questions around the corridor itself and the title that being put on title. So I want to start out by saying that I'm a supporter of this transit project. I think we need additional transit. I don't like how it's being done. I'm very frustrated with this engagement session, as I probably displayed in the chat. I know that the 30 meters, I know you gave an answer that I zoned out on that was very technical about why the corridor is 30 meters. And I know that the Eglinton's project was not 30 meters. So why is it so much? What's the reason for the difference? The second is the notice to be put on title doesn't have a start or end date. If you told me that Metrolinx will be on title to my property for 2 years while this subway is built, I'd say not a big problem. But it doesn't say that. It could be 10 years. It could be 12 years. And it very well could impact just being on title. Metrolinx being on title will impact our property values during the time that you are on title. And what is being done, if anything, to address people's property values while you're on title, even if you're not doing anything to our properties.
So I can, there's a few different questions here. So I'll start with the first one about the comparison with Eglinton and Scarborough. So there's a couple different reasons why our transit corridor lands look a fair bit different. The first being is that Scarborough notably is a bit of a legacy project. So their design is a little bit more advanced than the Ontario line. So some of the project, the transit corridor lands for Ontario line, we had to accommodate some areas of uncertainty. And so that's why we went a little bit wider in some areas to safeguard for different optioneering. Also, the landscape in the Ontario line study area is very different. So it's very, very dense road networks and intersections. And part of my rationale, I explained that where the alignment does meet those really complex, dense road networks, we had to essentially encompass an entire network of roads at that intersection to the adjacent intersection, because there's going to be a ripple effect of some construction impacts like traffic and utilities going that far out. So Scarborough and Eglinton are just very different projects with respect to that. And then the second part of your question, I think, was about the property value and the notice being on title. So again, it's really hard to comment on what we anticipate, how the notice is going to impact value. The notice itself, we don't anticipate to have a negative impact. The provisions of the act aren't hinged on the notice itself. There's lots of outliers that are at play when it comes to value, and I guess it is the unknown. It could, but it also might not, and we're hoping that maybe proximity to transit is a good news story. With respect to compensation, typically compensation comes into play if we're acquiring a part of property, or moving or relocating an object on property, but that's not what this notice is saying. It really is just an awareness piece that is letting people know that they're situated close to a transit project. So I think that's all we know at this time. And then you commented also, you had a question about how long. And I think that's why we don't have a designation, a notice date for removal, because it does apply for planning and construction. We have an estimated timeline of construction, but without ultimate certainty, I don't think we know how long it's going to be. But once construction is complete, the notice will be removed. So there's lots of different layers there. Team, if you think I didn't quite capture something in enough detail.
No, that's great. What we do want to make sure that we say, though, is that the transit corridor itself is 30 meters wide. And as we are going along that transit corridor, we have, as was described, bump outs. And these bump outs are at streets, usually, where we might have an impact due to utilities, traffic, and that sort of thing. And each one of those bump outs is 30 meters wide. So that's how these grow. And once again, Kelly, if you have any questions specifically to this, call our 416-202-5100. We will call you right back and help you understand the duration and share as much information as we can with you.
All right, thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Carolyn. Our next question comes from Anne. Anne, go ahead.
Oh, good evening. I was here assuming we were mainly talking about our portion south of Pape, the tunneling section, but I'm now gathering that's your North Civil segment and you don't have a lot of information on that. But I am also responding as a concerned property owner. I'm on the section just east of Withrow Park. I'm also a realtor in the area. I've been very concerned and fighting for the people in South Riverdale, Degrassi, etc., who are obviously here tonight again, fighting for the below ground option. I've also been very concerned for people with great residences on the valley at the north of Hopedale at the top of Pape. Until we got this letter a couple weeks ago, I was not worried. I knew it was coming, but the letter from Metrolinx put a lot of fear into us. With respect to title, I think any note, anybody's title can have these attachments on it. I want everyone to know that with respect to other properties, say Rosedale, Summerhill, they will have a similar note saying they're close to CN transit lines. So I want people to know that. I don't want to set a mass panic in our zone. We are high-end prime Toronto real estate. Toronto is great. People keep coming. We need to keep positive. But I think my biggest thing is we need great communication and information from Metrolinx. How, when, it's got to be neat, it's got to be clean. If residents are up in arms, it's going to reflect badly on all of us and panic. And we need you guys to give us great detail. I think that's my general note here today. Thank you.
And that was a great commentary and a great response to what BTFA is, and you understand it, obviously, it being in the real estate business. And your challenge to us to be able to communicate this is well understood. And you know, once again, if we always offer, if anyone in the community has any questions, you know, please don't fret over this. Give us a call because we're here to try and help you answer your questions.
Malcolm, if I can just add on to, I just want to reiterate something she was saying too, that having a notice on title is actually like a very common practice. For example, subdivisions have gated communities. If we think the closest comparison to this would be like an airport. So if you live in the airport zone, you have a proximity to the airport on your title. So it really is, it's a common practice for a situational type or proximity to a project. And so this is just another example of something like that.
All right, thanks so much. We're going to go to our next question coming from T-Mex. He has asked me to ask this question on his behalf. The question is, the bump out seems big. I am 60 meters from the proposed corridor. If I sell my house for X amount, can I tell the buyer they will get compensated for X amount, not some other value?
So I think, Carolyn, you might be best to answer that question.
So was it, sorry, can you repeat, Jackie? Was it about compensation?
Sure. I believe that that's the gist of it. So their house is 60 meters from the proposed corridor, and he's asking if he sells his house for an X amount of money, can he tell the buyer that they will get compensated for an additional amount?
Right. So I think this is a little bit similar. Might have touched on this again. So the notice isn't suggesting compensation because the notice isn't necessary. Like it's not saying that we're going to acquire the property whatsoever. So something I mentioned before, again, the notice is not necessarily like saying at all that we're going to have any impact on the property. So it's just an awareness piece to let a future buyer know. And the lawyer will be able to see this on the title search that's situated within close proximity to a transit corridor line. that's it. So again, we don't suspect that compensation will be needed for this notice. And again, we don't suspect that there will be a negative impact to the value.
And we would be compensating if we were having to act on the notice, if we were needing to tear down a shed or a pool, or do something like that, and we were going to be affecting your property. We would certainly be compensating those people and working with them to evaluate the level of compensation. So, but generally, most of the people that have got these notices, they are going to remain unaffected. And our goal and ambition is to complete construction as quickly as possible and get into a position to be able to remove these notices on title. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, we have our next question coming from MPP Peter Tabbins. MPP Tabbins, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to be quick because I know time is short. First question is, there was mention of an assessment of the condition of homes prior to construction, so that if there was a vibration claim later, there would be a baseline of evidence. Is that something Metrolinx is going to carry out through all the homes in the transit corridor, or a subset of those homes? And I would appreciate knowing that. I think constituents would. The question of the length of time that this notice will be on title, are we talking until the end of construction and effectively the finish of construction for the whole Ontario line, trains in operation, or are we talking about end of construction in a particular area? Because I know some areas will be done while other areas are still under construction, perhaps further north or further west. And lastly, Malcolm, you raised this. What's the cost of raising the rail bed for the above ground section south of Gerrard and the rebuilding of the 6 bridges? What's the independent cost of those items? And frankly, if you can tell us the timeline for doing that work as well, that'd be great. Thank you all.
Thank you, MPP Tabbins. First off, on the costing exercise, that's going to be part of the release that we're going to be sharing in the next go around. I told you, or I mentioned that we were preparing a piece of work that looked at the 5 different alignments, and we'll be doing that comparison and pricing against the joint corridor work that we're currently undertaking. And Richard, maybe you want to talk about the timeline piece, and then Carrie, you can talk about noise and vibration.
Well, I'd let Carrie go on the noise and vibration, and I think probably it's in terms of BTFA notice, it's probably maybe Carolyn could answer that one.
Yeah, I can just jump in quickly, Carrie, before you get to noise, because I think my answer is going to be a little bit shorter. Yeah, so I think it's to the former MPP. So I think it's going to be, I mean, there's still opportunity to revisit this, but it looks like probably till the entirety of construction is complete. But I think, again, there's an opportunity that maybe, given that we still have so much time to work with this, we can work with our ministry and maybe see that piecemeal it a bit if that's an option. So. Carrie.
And hi there, MPP Tabbins. So with respect to your question about pre-construction surveys for the entire transit corridor area, it will actually be site-specific based on the means and methods of construction. So there'll be a pretty thorough assessment to determine what the zone of influence is around those specific construction activities, and that's how we'll establish where the pre-construction surveys will happen. There will also be post-construction surveys so that we go back and we check and we make sure that everything is just as it was when we started the work, so that we can assess if in the unlikely event that there is some sort of impacts and damage. But as I mentioned, we have a lot of layers of safety built into our contracts, so that we're very cautious and we're very proactive in preventing those sort of things.
All right, thank you. Just being cognizant of the time, it's 7:59 and we still have 5 more people on our list for questions. So gauging the panelists, are you comfortable with with proceeding a little bit longer?
Of course.
Perfect. All right, so we're going to go to our next
Absolutely.
question. Our next question coming from Tristan. Tristan, go ahead.
Hi, I would like to know how will the GO Transit service be affected when during the construction of the Ontario line? Because like I know you need to raise the rail bed and then also constructing one more rail for the GO.
So,
Sure.
yeah,
Do I-
I can start off, and then Richard can certainly talk about the construction aspects of it. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be slewing the tracks in the corridor in order to do our pieces of construction. And when we're doing that, that will allow us to change elevations and make things eventually move back to its final configuration with, the 2 Ontario line tracks and the 4 GO tracks in their proper orientation. And that's part of the early works that Richard's going to be undertaking. Richard, maybe you just want to talk a little bit about the timing of that?
Sure. As we discussed, we anticipate the early works to be starting in next summer, 2022, and proceeding on for a couple of years thereafter. Essentially, that what we plan to do is, as you can see from our drawings, that the eventual cross section will be 6 tracks. Currently, as you know, in the corridor there's 3, but that allows us basically, if we slide the tracks over to one side, we can then work on the other side relatively unimpeded, finish that off and move the tracks back and then finish the other half. There is also an option that we've been exploring, given the reduced levels of service currently in effect, that we may be able to go down to 2 tracks for a period of time while still accommodating the schedule. This is very carefully worked through with our operations side, and we make sure that any impacts to service are well known in advance, and to the greatest extent possible, we aim for no impact on the services wherever we can. But given the width of the corridor and the ability to slide these tracks back and forth within the corridor, we expect that most of the work can occur without impact to the services that are currently scheduled.
Thanks, Richard. All right, we're going to go to our next question coming from Shelley. Shelley, go ahead.
Oh, hi, everybody. Thanks for taking my question. I know we're short on time, so I'll be brief. I think I'm going to just echo what MPP Peter Tabbins said. There's a massive change on the corridor, which you just kind of slid over tonight, which will cause major impacts to construction, to timelines, and to costs, which is the regrading of the entire corridor, along with our raising of the 5 bridges. I don't think people really understand yet what the impacts are of that, and I am interested because the timeline on your reporting for the early works report hasn't changed, and yet you've just done this massive shift in the corridor, literally going to pick up all these tracks, move them around, pick up the bridges, and study what the impacts are, study what the actual construction is, and how you're actually going to complete this construction, obviously while still maintaining rail traffic on the Lakeshore East Corridor. So I guess my question is, first off, my comment for the neighborhood is that we want these tracks underground. I would say that my comment is that you perhaps didn't think that this was going to be as complicated as you originally planned, or as costly or as timely to go above ground on this corridor. And it's turning out to be that. So I will reiterate on behalf of the neighborhood that we want these 2 tracks underground. It is the best, and it is the only mitigation for what you are proposing. Secondly, I guess I would like to ask, what is the real timeline for your early works report? And are you going to detail all of the changes that the raising and regrading of the corridor will cause in that report?
Sorry, it takes me a second to get off of mute. Thanks, Shelley, for your question. And I can take that with respect to the early works report. So the assessments are well underway at the moment, and we've been working very, very closely with Richard's team to understand all of the design implications, how the tracks are shifting within the corridor, and our assessments are based on the most up-to-date designs. So we will be looking at all of the impacts. We will be looking at all of the designs on any potential impacts and putting forward proposed mitigation. And some of that you've already heard about with our continuous noise walls up and down the joint corridor. And all of this will be summarized in our early works reports, and those will be made available for draft review and comment in early fall of this year. We hope to be out earlier than that with some more detailed focused discussions on noise and vibration. So stay tuned for that. But our timelines remain early works report this fall, and we look forward to having some more in-depth conversations about that.
Yeah, and just in terms of the construction question that you asked, which are good questions, but essentially when the original straddle alignment, as was called when we had the tracks on both sides, there was quite a significant amount of bridge construction that was associated with that in terms of producing space for the Ontario line tracks to be introduced, and it also included regrading of large parts of the corridor in any case, because essentially to make the Ontario line, you'd have them on the outside, they go up to provide the additional bridge clearance that's required in the new standards over the standards that were prevalent in the 1920s. And essentially, to accomplish that, basically some of the middle had to come up as well. So there was grading that went on. There's retaining walls are basically similar to what was there before. Yes, the new bridges are being replaced. It was at the time when we originally did the straddle analysis, it was a fine line between actually retaining the old bridges and their state of good repair costs going forward versus building new bridges. The decision at that time was to retain them. But with the new alignments, it looks like it's a better option to replace the bridges, which, as you say, has a little more capital cost. But on the other hand, it significantly decreases ongoing maintenance, and that maintenance would have disrupted the community going forward. So that there's a good news story there. And finally, I think we always thought that building obviously in a downtown urban area is always a complicated affair, and there's always lots of costs associated with that, and lots of things that regulations and standards we have to meet and follow that come from Kerry's group and many other places in terms of bylaws and various other standards for noise, vibration, and dust, and various other things. But compared to building a tunnel, it is a whole order of magnitude more complicated to build a tunnel. We are building tunnels in the downtown, and we build tunnels elsewhere as well, and we have combination alignments across our system. The tunnel construction is just a whole order of magnitude different than trying to regrading a corridor in the open air. And it'll take a lot more time and much more money. So hopefully that answers that question. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Richard. All right, next question coming from Patrick. Patrick, go ahead.
Hi there. Oh, can you hear me? Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I wanted to ask about the hill leading up to the tracks on the west side, because it seems like that's where the expansion is taking place. I'm on Salter Street. I'm just going to flip my camera around. Because what I understand is there's the brewery, there's the berm. Because of the retaining wall, and because there'll be a retaining wall, and then there'll be a noise barrier above that. So all those I just want to make for clarification, all those trees will be gone in this new proposal, because this is the west side where the two tracks will be. Is that what I'm understanding? And sorry about the state of my backyard.
I don't know, Malcolm, do you want to address that? I unfortunately,
I unfortunately couldn't see it, Patrick. I'm blind to the presentation in the Zoom room. But I think I know where you're talking about. You're talking about the trees that are inside the property line for Metrolinx. And if that's what you are talking about, we are doing a tree inventory through the entire alignment there. There are going to be a number of trees, large number of trees that get cut down in the Metrolinx right of way. A lot of them are invasive species. A lot of them are very poor shape. But we will be sharing that arborist report, and we will be highlighting the trees that are affected. So. If once again, if you take a picture, send an email to us. We'll respond back to you. Unfortunately, I just can't see what I'm imagining what you're looking at right now. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Malcolm. All right, we have two more people on our list. The next person is Mo. Mo, go ahead.
Hi there. My question is in regards to, I live on Degrassi Street, just south of where Bruce Mackey starts. And I mean, you can hear the train right now from how close it is. Now, steps away from me is literally the wall that exists right now. And my understanding from the gentleman that walked around from Metrolinx is that you potentially might be bringing this this barrier or sound wall, whatever it's called, 4 meters in. And that means I could almost touch this wall from where I come out of my front door. And I'm just trying to understand, how are you guys thinking about this in terms of risk, safety, and just common sense?
So Mo, I can talk to that. That corner exactly where you are is an area that we're working on to try and push back the foundations as far as we can to minimize the impact. 4 meters is not the impact there. Right now, we are looking at a 2 meter impact, but we're working desperately hard right now to push that back to the property line as best we can.
Yeah, and I would just add that the 2 meters is a maximum, right? It goes from 0 up to 2 meters maximum and over in that area. And as Malcolm says, it's one of the things we're looking at and trying to figure out if we can cantilever that or provide some other mitigation that would reduce even that size of impact.
All right, thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Richard. We have our last question coming from Scott. Scott, go ahead.
Sorry about that. A very quick question. Thank you for the opportunity. A very quick question regarding access points. Looking for some clarification. Earlier on, you stated that you'd only be using the main thoroughfares for access points, but some of your diagrams show a lot of activity at the end of First Avenue. So I'm just looking for clarification that First Avenue will not be used as an accent point for the construction at the end of it.
Hi, it's Richard here. Great question. Yes, no, First Avenue will not be used. Again, access in that area would be from Gerard. The property at the end of First Avenue is part of the widening of the right of way in that area that's required for the Gerard station. And at that property, once we've acquired it, will be used for the construction, accessing from Gerard and for the new station, and the balance of it will be returned to the Gerard Street Parkette and Gerard Carlisle Parkette, substantially increasing the size of that park in the long term, in the medium to long term. And I think that's back to you, Joseph, or is it Jackie?
Okay, Jackie, thank you so very much for that. And thank you everybody for attending. We've gone a bit over time, but I hope that everybody who is attending feels that it was well worthwhile in order to address the questions that were here. Now, having said that, this is not the end. Metrolinx is committed to listening to you, taking your calls, providing information. And while you're on the website, if you just go up to the green menu items at the top on the right-hand side, there were some people who were asking questions very specific to themselves. You can book a meeting using the meeting booker that's right there in that right-hand menu. If you want more information under the contact us, you can subscribe to the newsletter and put yourself on the mailing list. The live meetings button will give you a chance to register for future events. And under the Get Engaged button, earlier Kerry talked about the draft early works report for the Lower Don Bridge and Don Yard. And if you just go into the Get Engaged button, you'll see that there's a link to that under the What's New within that particular area. So after the meeting, possibly go there. We will also leave the written question form open for a little while tonight so that if you have some further thoughts and you'd like to place a question, you can do that. Metrolinx will perhaps group some of the questions, but they will be responding to the questions over the next week or so. So even if we didn't get to your question tonight, it is important to Metrolinx, and you will see responses to all of the written questions along with the video recording of tonight's meeting and the other presentation materials. So this has been a good session. I hope you think it was a good session. We'll send you a questionnaire tomorrow asking you how we did. Please answer honestly. It helps us to improve in the future. And thank you again. Good night, and please stay home safely, at least for now.